Hey, you guys. So today I want to go back a few years, delve back into my music publishing days when I was working a 9 to 5, and I want to talk about how Avril Lavigne saved my job. So here we go.
Packing up my suitcase, heading to the highway. I don't even care anymore. Throwing out my old ways.
This is a story that I've been wanting to share for some time because it really highlights just how messed up the music industry was at the turn of the century when we were just starting to feel the impact of music piracy. We were starting to see how that was going to influence our bottom line, and also how the downturn of the economy was really affecting us. So to understand how Avril Lavigne saved my job, let me go back to 1999. At that time, Rondor Music, which was the company I worked for, was still privately owned. It was owned by Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss. We had been quite successful in the 90s. A lot of great things had happened. But just as we were entering the 2000s, the music industry was already seeing this huge corporatization take place. Many of the great labels were being bought up by corporations. These corporations that didn't really necessarily know anything about music, their main business was completely unrelated, but they saw the music business in the 90s as being something that was really viable, really financially viable, and they wanted to get a piece of it. So we were starting to see these companies buy chunks of the music industry, and that had an interesting effect on the owners of our company. They saw an industry that was going to be increasingly difficult to compete in when you had major companies, for instance, like Universal Music or Warner Brothers, where they could throw down millions of dollars to sign somebody's publishing. And our owners just didn't feel like that was a business they could be in. They were used to spending, at the top dollar, they were used to spending maybe hundreds of thousands, but hopefully they could keep deals within the 150 range or less. So our owners were starting to look out there on the horizon of this and say, I think we need to get out of this business while we're on top. So in 1999, Rondor Music put itself up for sale. And without getting into some of the legalities of it and why, it turned out that Universal was the best suited buyer for Rondor. And so Universal Music bought us. Throughout 1999, it was just a crazy year. Many of us didn't even know if we were going to have jobs. I expected to be let go. I didn't figure they would need me. At the time, I was still in a band. It was really blowing up around town. I thought, well, okay, I may lose my job here, but everything's going my way. So I didn't really care. But as we moved toward 2000 and they were finalizing the sale of Rondor, strangely enough, I ended up being one of the people that they decided to take forward going to Universal. Our first year, that year, 2000 through 2001, that was a crazy year because anybody in their right mind had to ask, why did Universal buy a living company? Typically, in a situation like that, they would just want to buy the assets. They want to buy the catalog. They've got personnel. They've got copyright, royalty, business affairs. They've got all the departments in place. They're handling a catalog of over 1 million songs already. We're bringing in maybe 50 to 70,000 songs. So why do they want this separate company to sort of still be alive under the Universal umbrella? It made more sense when they would buy up labels like that because you want to keep kind of this unique personality associated with an individual label under this big umbrella, this big corporate umbrella. But publishing, it didn't quite make sense. And I think that was true among the employees that were working for Rondor. It was certainly true among many of the employees with Universal. It was like, what are those guys doing over there? Why are they even occupying office space? And I would say that for the first year, in many ways, we were treated like this has got to go away, right? These guys are going to be let go within the year because this must have just been part of some negotiation, some legal wrangling when they were making the purchase that these guys all ended up as part of the deal. So that year was critical because if we were going to continue on, we needed to somehow prove ourselves. But as I mentioned at the intro of my video here, this was the moment where we were starting to feel the initial effects of music piracy, how the internet was going to affect the industry going forward, and we were moving into an economic downturn at the same time. So our industry that was just thriving in 1998, 1999, by 2000 and 2001, things were going bad. It just sort of became clear that if we didn't do something extraordinary to put us on the map again, we probably wouldn't be there in 6 months to a year. So in a moment of do or die, one of the NR guys, Ron Moss, son of Jerry Moss, Ron is looking for a signing, and he's talking to a manager one day, and he says, so what do you got going on with your artist? Tell me somebody that you see that maybe is doing something exciting. And this manager says, well, there's a girl that we have signed out of Canada. And he said, I was in Vancouver to see one of her shows recently. And he said, the place was packed. And everybody knew all the lyrics to her songs, and nothing's been released yet. So clearly she's got something going on. She's got people stirred up. And her name is Avril Lavigne. And Avril had signed a record deal. She was signed to Arista. Ron said, well, has she signed her publishing yet? And he says, well, we're working on something, but it's not signed yet. So the manager puts Ron in contact with Avril's attorney. He calls the attorney, says, hey, is her publishing still available? And he goes, I've been working on this publishing deal for the last few months. It's done. All I'm waiting for is Avril to come down so she can sign. So Ron says, what's it going to take for me to buy 24 hours? What will you need to hold off on this deal for 24 hours till I can figure out what I want to do? So the attorney says, for me to hold off on this deal, it would take $1 million. And Ron says, okay, $1 million. Give me 24 hours to figure out what we want to do. So this is basically what we had. We knew that she was signed to a record label. She was unknown, globally speaking. She was certainly unknown in the U.S. She was a brand new artist, totally untried, and it was in a moment where the industry was already starting to take a downward turn. But Ron and the guy who ran our company, Lance Freed, those two guys knew that we needed something. We needed something fresh. We needed something to really put a face on the company. They sent us over 3 of her songs. Complicated was one of them, I think Losing Grip. And so the question for that 24 hours was, is this worth us picking up this deal for $1 million? I can tell you that almost in any situation, at least back then, there's no way anybody would have put $1 million down on a brand new untried artist. But we were in that place where we needed to do something just to show how potentially deadly this deal was for the company, how much it could influence us negatively. Lance gets on the phone with the guy who runs Universal Music, Zach Horowitz, and he talks to him about the deal, and Zach says, personally, I would rather see the deal go to EMI. But if you want to sign this, I'm going to let it be your call. I think in his mind, he felt like this was already a big chance, and if these guys blow it with this deal, it's going to be the end. So in his mind, he thought this is probably not going to be a smart move for Rondor. This may be where Lance Freed's true genius shined, as it has many times in the guy's career. He just decided, I'm going for it. And that's the kind of guy he was in many of his biggest deals over the years. He signed mega deals in really amazing catalogs, and I think often he did it by the seat of his pants. So Ron reaches back out to the attorney, says, you guys hold off on the EMI deal. We're about to submit a deal proposal for $1 million. It's essentially swept the EMI deal off the table. When I heard the music, personally, to my credit, I loved it. I thought it sounded great. I don't think I understood how precarious our situation was with Universal at the time. I had seen several signings over the years, and I had a pretty good idea of what would succeed and what wouldn't. And I felt good about the Avril thing. But when you walked into our business affairs department, those guys were already packing their bags. It was like they just knew this was going to be the final nail in the coffin. This was over if we signed this deal. So we signed the deal, and little by little, we start seeing this song Complicated start making some moves on the charts. And Avril's now doing some shows in the U.S. She was starting to get some exposure here. And every week we were checking the charts, and every week this little song, Complicated, just kind of kept edging its way up. Enough to the point where after a few weeks of having her signed, it was like, this looks like it might do something. This is going somewhere. This almost punk pop rock thing that she was doing, she had great potential if she could break through because she was kind of unique, one of a kind. Sure enough, every week that song just kept ramping up the charts till at one point it just became evident this song is going to be a smash hit and we're going to look like geniuses over here at Rondor. Avril Lavigne blew up big time. Not just one song, but several songs. She just kept blowing them up. And When you walked into the Rondor office, we had the huge Avril Lavigne album plaque there. That's what saved the company. And that gave Universal something to talk about in their meetings. Well, if you don't know who Rondor is, just think Avril Lavigne. They signed that. And it was such a brilliant signing because Zach Horowitz, the guy who ran Universal, didn't want to sign it. He was feeling cautious about that. And yet here's Lance Freed, a veteran in the industry, and he just basically throws it down and goes, I like it, I want to sign it. And it was one of his obviously brilliant moments that kept the company alive, gave us a face in the early 2000s that we didn't have. And we just kept going for many years after that. So thank you, Avril Lavigne. Thank you, Lance Freed. Thank you, Ron Moss. All right, so if you enjoyed that, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification bell. And until next time,